The smiling, kurta-wearing Shinzo Abe has another side to him, one of a thinker on security issues. In an article written in 2012, Abe calls for strong ties with India, Australia and the United States to counter the challenge from China. Now he's putting it in practice, finding a willing partner in Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
5 years ago, in an article, Shinzo Abe described the security challenge from China in the following terms. Quote, increasingly the South China Sea seems set to become a Lake Beijing, a sea deep enough for the People's Liberation Army's Navy to base their nuclear-powered attack submarines capable of launching missiles with nuclear warheads. Soon, the PLA Navy's newly built aircraft carrier will be a common sight, more than sufficient to scare China's neighbors. This is why Japan must not yield to the Chinese government's daily exercises in coercion around the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, unquote. In the same article, he sketched the possibility of a security alliance which he described as Asia's democratic security diamond. Quote, I envisage a strategy whereby Australia, India, Japan and the US state of Hawaii form a diamond to safeguard the maritime commons stretching from the Indian Ocean region to the Western Pacific. I am prepared to invest to the greatest possible extent Japan's capabilities in this security diamond, unquote. The pundits say that since then, slowly and subtly the security diamond has moved into place under the cloak of trilateral dialogue. It was indirectly endorsed by former US President Barack Obama in January 2015 on his visit to Delhi. In December 2015, Modi and Abe lauded the India-Japan-US trilateral dialogue and the Japan-India-Australia trilateral dialogue. By September 2017, this had broadened with Modi and Abe welcoming their countries' trilateral cooperation with the US and Australia. They also called for a rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. China has reacted, warning that regional countries should stand for dialogue without confrontation, but the Shinzo Abe article is far more ambitious in its scope. It calls for a role for the UK and France in strengthening Asian security. He wanted Japan to join the five-power defence arrangement which brings together the Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia and the UK. He said the French Pacific Fleet in Tahiti could play a key role in Asia's defence and said Japan should reinvest in its security ties with the US. As Abe underscores, this is not a call to arms against China. Rather, that for Japan's ties with China to improve, Tokyo needed to first anchor its relations on the other side of the Pacific with countries that respect the rule of law and human rights. Bureau Report, WION.
Joining us this evening, Vishnu Prakash, former High Commissioner of India to Canada, Ambassador to Seoul and official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, with us from Gurugram. Professor James D. Brown, international affairs expert, with us from Tokyo this evening. Sanjana Joshi, consultant with ICRIER and expert on Japan, with us from Delhi. And Ramesh Ramachandran, international correspondent with WION from Ahmedabad. Good evening to everyone. Ramesh, you are in the city where all the action is happening. Take us through the highlights of the day as you see them.
Well, we are, towards reaching the finale, as it were, before Prime Minister Abe emplanes for Tokyo. But these were two eventful days, to put it mildly, Palki. And why do I say that? We saw the joint statement being issued earlier in the evening, and that is a voluminous document, almost 60-odd points contained in that joint statement. And to my mind, I will just want to recall and recollect 3 paragraphs from that joint statement, which should give everybody watching WION this evening a flavor of the kind or the nature of India-Japan relationship. And these pertain to paragraphs number 52, 53 and 54. 52 deals with one issue that is of mutual concern to both India and Japan, namely the Indo-Pacific region and the security of sea lanes of communication. 53 deals with one issue that is close to Japan's heart and of utmost concern to Tokyo, and that is the North Korean crisis. And para 53 deals with one issue that is of immediate concern to India, namely terrorism. And the convergence of interests on all 3 issues, Palki, should give everybody a flavor of where this relationship is headed.
Vishnu Prakash, same question to you. What, according to you, are the highlights of this visit?
Well, I think that with this visit, the relationship has leaped forward. And I would think that India-Japan relations have come of age. I have rarely seen a joint statement that is so substantive and so comprehensive. It covers practically every aspect that India is interested in and Japan is interested in. And it makes for recrafting of this relationship, infusing a tremendous momentum and dynamism to the relationship.
James Brown, what are the big takeaways? Let's get a view from Tokyo as well.
Well, I think from the perspective of Prime Minister Abe, the key is really to do with security. Of course, he's very much interested in the economic situation. He wants to be able to export Japanese technology, in particular the Shinkansen, the bullet train technology, also for the sale of nuclear technology. But really what's underlying all of this for Abe is the desire to have closer security relations with India, because of course Japan is very, very concerned about the rise of China and the perceived threat that poses to Japan's security.
Sanjana Joshi, the favorite word of experts on India-Japan relationship at this time, it seems, is transformation. It's being called a game-changing phase in bilateral ties. For the benefit of our viewers, please explain why.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that this particular visit is a game changer. I think definitely we have to agree that India-Japan relations have been on a real upswing ever since the NDA government has been in power, and the personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe has certainly helped matters. And so definitely this visit further, in my opinion, doesn't transform but reinforces the strong foundation for bilateral relations that the two countries have been trying to put in place for the last few years. So I would say that.
James Brown?
And it's both strategic and economic in nature.
Sure. James Brown, the two leaders spoke about the security diamond. Is this, according to you, the clearest signal yet that Tokyo and New Delhi are very serious when it comes to countering Chinese expansionist policies?
I think that's exactly correct. We've seen that this has been building up for several years now, but I think with this visit, it's really taken it to an additional level. And in particular, what stood out for me was in the joint statement highlighting sides about the freedom of navigation. Now, that didn't mention China directly, but everyone knows that in particular is a reference to China's activities in the South China Sea.
Vishnu Prakash, at what stage, according to you, is this collaboration, and how do you see Beijing responding to the coming together of India, Japan, and also Australia and the US, as has been said about this strategic diamond? That's what they're calling it.
Well, China will certainly take a careful note about it. I would think that normal noises, expected noises will be made. What we are seeing is certainly the democratic forces or the desire on the part of democratic establishments, like-minded countries with similar values, similar aspirations, similar concerns, attempting to come together. Frankly, Chinese creeping expansionism, Chinese muscle flexing is causing anxiety and angst to practically every country in the neighborhood. Peaceful rise of China is what they talk about, but in fact what one sees is on ground, one sees a different posture, different ball game, and therefore today's development, today's statements, today's expression of interest and by the leaders, especially talking about the desire to expand trilateral cooperation with Australia, US and other countries, I think is an important development.
Absolutely. Let's, in fact, dwell on the China angle a bit further. I'll request you all to stay with us. Beijing has been watching this development in Gandhinagar very, very closely, and the developments seem to have made China a little uneasy. Its Foreign Affairs Ministry, for one, in a statement said that India and Japan should focus on building a partnership instead of an alliance. Listen in.
我们倡导的呢是地区国家要共同努力，对话而不对抗，结伴而不结盟，共建互信、包容、合作和共赢的亚太伙伴关系。我们对于周边的国家之间发展正常的国家间关系持欢迎和开放的态度。我们希望有关国家之间的这种关系的发展，能够为增进地区国家间的互信与合作，维护地区的和平稳定和发展呢，发挥建设性的作用。
Harsh words continue to flow in from the Chinese newspaper The Global Times. In an editorial, the newspaper boasted that no country can challenge China and no grouping can challenge it. The editorial took a dig at the intimacy between Prime Ministers Modi and Abe, saying that India and Japan have, quote-unquote, somewhat lost themselves here, and both countries do not impose any challenge to Beijing. China has been wary of the growing intimacy between India and Japan. In 2016, remember, it had issued a strong response against the prospective sale of Japan's amphibious aircraft to India. Beyond the war for influence in the region, China and Japan are also engaged in a battle for the business of bullet train. Beijing has been competing with Tokyo to build high-speed rail lines around Asia and Europe. As India and Japan finalize the bullet train deal here at home, Beijing has recently secured contracts in Laos, Indonesia, and Thailand. And let's also talk about the big takeaways as we see them from the Ahmedabad summit. In political and diplomatic terms, there was renewed commitment to some key issues of bilateral concern, including an open and prosperous Indo-Pacific, respect for international law and sovereignty, and freedom of navigation and overflight. Both sides also agreed on some key political and diplomatic initiatives. India and Japan will play a central role in safeguarding this rules-based order. Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and India's Act East policy will be suitably aligned. Enhanced cooperation with ASEAN to beef up trilateral cooperation with the US, Australia and other countries, leverage the bilateral investment proportion partnership to build a wider network of relationships. Now, in defense and security terms, there was a clear commitment from both sides to expand maritime domain awareness in the Indo-Pacific region and indirect reference to the South China Sea. Military exchanges are expected to see a flip. For the first time, beginning perhaps next year, there will be joint exercises between the Indian and Japanese militaries. The two navies will expand cooperation in anti-submarine activities. They will begin discussions on collaboration in unmanned ground vehicles and robotics. There will be collaboration in dual-use technologies. The bilateral cyber dialogue will get a leg up. So a lot of ground has been covered. There was an indirect reference to the China-Pakistan economic corridor as well, both sides indicating that they preferred something more transparent, sustainable, with responsible debt financing practices. There was also commitment to the Africa Growth Corridor with the identification of priority projects. We've listed perhaps everything, Ramesh, but terrorism is something that made headlines and will be seen in newspapers tomorrow. That's something that both sides also spoke about.
Absolutely, Palki. This is the second time in recent weeks that any joint statement or multilateral document specifically mentions terror groups operating from Pakistani soil, namely Jaish-e-Mohammed, whose leader, Masood Azhar, is still, India wants to be proscribed by the United Nations Security Council 1267 resolution. And to my mind, this should be seen in the context of the blossoming relationship between India and Japan. But just to come back to the point of Indo-Pacific, Palki, I want to take a moment or two to talk about this region, which is of utmost importance and concern to both India and Japan. The joint statement specifically, as Ambassador Prakash mentioned there, talks about cooperation and keeping up the momentum between India, Japan, the US and Australia. And in the run-up to the summit here in Ahmedabad, Palki, Japanese sources told WION that they were very bullish on the idea of upgrading the security talks with India Remember the 2+2 security dialogue between India and Japan at the Foreign Secretary and Defense Secretary level to that of the ministerial level. And India, to my mind, is still gauging and understanding the importance and enormity of that decision and has sidestepped the issue for now. But one can expect some forward movement, as the statement said, to keep up the momentum of security dialogue between and among India, Japan, the US and Australia. Australia also is equally interested in turning the trilateral into a quadrilateral. But to my mind, India is still is ambivalent on this issue. As you pointed out, it sees partnership, not alliance in terms of engagement with China. To my mind, that is a big, important takeaway from this afternoon's engagements here in Ahmedabad.
Sanjana, there's been a debate going on in Japan on junking the no nukes policy. That was not something that was brought up, but do you see a potential there for collaboration between the two sides?
In civil nuclear energy, certainly there is a huge potential for collaboration. And that's precisely why so much effort is made to craft the India-Japan civil energy deal. The issue is that there's really not much clarity on how the two countries plan to proceed now that this deal is signed, and what really and exactly how they plan to operationalize it. How are we going to be implementing it? What kind of projects that have been identified, and so essentially it's a question of lack of clarity on the operationalization, which really is a concern for people if you see it from an economic point of view.
Professor Brown, I want to go back to the point that Ramesh was making, and that's something that you and I discussed earlier in the day about some areas where Japan believed more could have been achieved during this visit.
Well, I think even on this trip, whilst the atmospherics were very good, whilst there was a lot that was positive, there were some disappointments for Japan in particular. They wanted to make progress in arms sales to India. This is something that Prime Minister Abe has made a priority. He wants to develop Japan's military-industrial complex to become a more important kind of exporter of arms. And one target market is India. However, so far, there's not really been any progress in that direction. In particular, it seems to be that the US-2, the aircraft that Japan is trying to sell, it's simply deemed to be too expensive for the search and rescue function that it's designed for. Further to that, Japan, I think, is a little bit disappointed about the fact that the security dialogue is not going to be upgraded to a ministerial level. Japan wanted officially to have the 2+2 as being something that would be a regular occurrence between Japan and India. That hasn't come off. So there's still some things to work on here.
Vishnu Prakash, do you want to shed more light on what is holding back defense trade and in general and the US-2 deal in particular?
In fact, if we just look at the trajectory of enhancement or deepening of defense and security cooperation, I would say that without any exaggeration that it is simply remarkable. Look at what we are doing. We are having annual defense ministers dialogue. We have NSA's dialogue, we have mill-to-mill dialogue, we have Navy-to-Navy dialogue, Air Force to Air Force, Coast Guard to Coast Guard, 2+2 dialogue. We are talking of technology transfer, we are talking of equipment acquisition. I mean, the relationship of defense and security relationship has literally been transformed. And this is not the end of the matter. I think we are just seeing the beginning of a process. As both sides build more confidence in each other, try out each other, I think what we will see is a qualitative expansion for the simple reason, Palki, what is important is to note that we have no divergence of interest with Japan. We have only convergences of interest, and we have a similar value system, similar security concerns, and we are investing big time in each other. So I am very bullish on that. As far as the US-2 amphibious aircraft is concerned, going by media reports that I have been reading, apparently it's a question of the price. And certainly price has to be negotiated very carefully. According to media reports, the price is about $100 million a piece. Now, I guess I'm not privy to the discussions, but there will be a question of how many units to be procured, where to be manufactured, what will be the specifications, and so on. And it has been very clearly noted in the joint statement that, and Foreign Secretary also mentioned, that serious discussions are underway for this particular technology platform.
Sanjana, what about trade? Why isn't it picking up? It has in fact gone down in the recent years.
Yes, definitely. From as a lot of people have noted, bilateral trade is down, and Indian exports have almost halved to less than 4 billion this year from over 6 billion that we had a few years ago in 2013 and 14. And especially worrying is the fact that the service sector has not really benefited from the India-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement that was signed over 6 years ago. I think the issues, but one should not emphasize the going down of trade. These are annual sort of figures. They go up, they go down marginally. What is really important from the point of view of India-Japan economic engagement is that FDI, the foreign direct investment from Japan, has picked up substantially in the last few years. And as Prime Minister Modi himself pointed out today, that Japan invested more than $4.5 billion in India in the last fiscal year, and which was almost 80% higher than the previous year. So essentially, one has to look at holistically at economic engagement. The issues in bilateral trade are quite sort of well known in terms of the market access and the problem with quality of Indian products going to Japan, and a lot of things that have to be worked out. But really, from India's point of view, the success is that the Japanese are finally sort of looking at India as a credible and important investment destination. That is the big story, really, in India-Japan relations today.
Right, I'm being told I have to take a break. We will take this discussion forward in just a couple of minutes from now. We'll also talk about the 5 things India and Japan need to work on to achieve the full potential of this relationship. We're discussing the bilateral summit between India and Japan. The Prime Ministers of two countries had a string of meetings today. 15 agreements were signed, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, as we speak, is, I believe, boarding his plane back home. With me, Vishnu Prakash, Professor James D. Brown, Sanjana Joshi, and Ramesh Ramachandran. Professor Brown, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor is being pegged as a counter to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. It was mentioned in the joint statement, but not much has been said about it.
And it seems to be the case that so far that remains very much a vague idea. Now, we all know that this is because both India and, to a lesser extent, Japan are very concerned by the Belt and Road Initiative. So this has been suggested as an alternative. But really, it's no more than an alternative on paper. Whilst China's Belt and Road Initiative has moved forward really quite significantly, has a number of concrete partners, concrete projects, so far that the Indian and Japanese suggestion is not really got off the ground.
Ramesh, is this an idea that has been put on the back burner for the moment?
Clearly not. This is still an idea, a work in progress, really. Remember, many see this Asia-Africa Growth Corridor as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And to my mind, both countries have come to an informal agreement or understanding on earmarking almost $40-odd billion for development projects in Africa. But to my mind, very quickly, Palki, the special strategic and global partnership which India calls its ties with Japan has a special significance. Why do I say that? Because the regional and global dimension or context or underpinning to this relationship is as important as a bilateral component. Remember, India and Japan, as Ambassador Prakash mentioned, have more convergences than divergences. They do not have any outstanding differences between them. Two, there is a degree of strategic trust between India and Japan. On both these counts, India-China relationship falls flat on its face. But that said, there is an asymmetry here, Palki. We should not forget or overlook that. Japan falls under the American nuclear umbrella. India does not. It'll be interesting to see, therefore, how India negotiates or maneuvers this geopolitical maze in the days ahead.
Vishnu Prakash, taking this forward then, one dimension of this relationship is the idea to counter China. The other perhaps is uncertainty over America's policy under Donald Trump.
Well, let's not overplay the aspect of countering China. Sino-Indian relationship and I would think Sino-Japanese relationship are important relationships. Both countries have invested a lot in the relationship, and for us, engagement with China, cooperative ties with China are important. It's not a zero-sum game. Now, at the same time, if we are building synergies with Japan, for example, we are talking of Africa now. Look at India and Africa. We are the fourth largest trading partner of Africa with $75 billion in trade. We have more than $55 billion of investments in Africa. We have a huge footprint in Africa. The India-Africa Foreign Summits have been assigning billions of dollars in assistance. Under the ITEC program, we have been offering tens of thousands of training slots a year. We are interested in Africa. Japan is interested in Africa. Now, as Ramesh said, both sides are working together. We are kind of finding a ways and means to go ahead, to proceed ahead. So it's as I see it, is a building block approach, and it's a process. And we are rapidly traveling on that. We are covering ground on that process. It's an incremental process, and I must say that I'm very happy to see the progress that has been achieved in this round of discussions and this visit by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
We're trying to look at all sides. Sanjana, do you see any obvious hurdles going forward?
Obvious hurdles in term from an economic relationship point of view is really is really from the Indian side, which is in terms of delivery of promises made, really, because a lot of these summits and even in case of India-Japan relationship, the issue with annual summits is that the focus always is really on the big announcements. And then what happens, today it is the Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail corridor. Just a couple of years ago, it was DMRC. Today, there was just a small mention of the two prime ministers noted with satisfaction the progress, and we all know the kind of problems, that DMRC has been facing in terms of implementation. So, really, the issue would be, how do we take this relationship forward from the big announcements? How do we actually get success stories out of it?
I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks very much, Sanjana Joshi, Ramesh Ramachandran, Professor James D. Brown and Vishnu Prakash. Appreciate you all joining us. The India-Japan relationship, of course, has seen its fair share of ups and downs, as was discussed on the show just a few minutes back. It's been on the upswing for some years now, thanks in no small measure to the personal effort of both prime ministers. But there are still areas which need substantial work. WION's Aditya Dhunna lists 5 issues on which the two countries must urgently focus.
India-Japan bilateral ties have taken a back seat in the relationship of late. It has dropped by 7% and it is only a quarter of the trade between India and China. This has been an area of keen interest between both the countries, as Japanese businesses are looking to venture into new markets, but for various reasons, not much progress has been achieved. Defence has emerged as a major area of partnership between two countries, but one is yet to see any substantial movement in terms of defence trade. While both New Delhi and Tokyo have agreed to collaborate on defense production and research. The deal for the US to Shinmewa amphibious aircraft is yet to materialize. Tokyo so far has been slow to commit to the Make in India vision. Shinzo Abe hoped to change that with this visit, with 4 locations in India being finalized for Japanese industrial townships, but manufacturers have been concerned about the production quality in Indian facilities. India has extended the visa on arrival facility to Japanese citizens. Japan could gain by reciprocating in kind, considering the fact that it is a preferred destination to work for IT professionals, which is India's strength. India and Japan share strong cultural affinities, but people-to-people exchanges remain thin. Language remains a major barrier. Exchanges between Indian and Japanese students have also dropped significantly. Bureau Report, WION.